You have watched a man go undefeated against the Avengers, and you still call him a failed villain. So does almost everyone. Baron Zemo appears in exactly 2 Marvel properties: Captain America: Civil War in 2016, 6 episodes of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier in 2021. He wins in both. Not a lucky break, not a partial victory the heroes salvaged at the last minute. 2 entries, 2 wins, and no powers involved in either one. No serum, no suit, no enhanced anything. The scoreboard is not in dispute. The reading of it is. And before we go any further, let me be completely clear about something. Zemo is a war criminal. He earned that label, and nothing in the next few minutes takes it back. None of it is in question. But somewhere in the middle of all that, he said something out loud about the people he was fighting. He told Sam Wilson that the danger with America's super soldiers is that we put them on pedestals, that they become symbols, icons, and that we start to forget about their flaws. Sam and Bucky both told him he was wrong, in the moment, to his face. 2 of the most sympathetic characters in the franchise. 1 episode later, the show settled it, and not in their favor. Zemo has never lost. Not once, not partially, not in a way the heroes walked back afterwards. He appears in exactly 2 Marvel properties: Captain America: Civil War, released in 2016, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, 6 episodes in 2021. In the film, he sets out to break the Avengers apart, and by the end of it, they are broken. In the series, he sets out to see the super soldiers gone, and by the end of the finale, they are gone. 2 entries, 2 wins. No serum, no suit, no enhanced anything. As a viewer, you watched both of those endings and read the same thing into them. He got caught, custody at the end of the first one, the raft at the end of the second. That is what losing looks like, so that is what you filed. As an adult, with the whole run behind you, neither ending reads that way anymore. That's not a man being stopped, that's a man being finished. And the second one has a mechanism behind it that almost nobody notices on a first watch. We'll come back to it. You are already building the objection, and you should be. Zemo bombed the United Nations building in Vienna. King T'Chaka died in that blast. He murdered Vasily Karpov. He framed an innocent man for all of it. Vienna wasn't collateral damage, it was targeting. And he did it as a former colonel who once commanded Eco Scorpion, a covert kill squad. And that name wasn't invented for the film. That is not a grieving civilian who snapped. That is an intelligence officer running an operation. None of that is in question. Nothing in the rest of this takes a single body off that list. But being a monster and being correct are 2 separate measurements. And nobody in this story ever ran the second one. I'm not going to defend him yet. Not here. Because the case against him gets stronger before it gets weaker. Near the end of Captain America: Civil War, T'Challa stands over him in the wreckage and asks him what he wanted, and Zemo answers by describing a car window. His son was excited, he says, because he could see Iron Man from the car. His father lived outside the city, so he thought they would be safe there. He told his wife not to worry. They're fighting in the city. We're miles from harm. Then the dust cleared and the screaming stopped, and it took him 2 days to find them. His father was still holding his wife and his son, and the Avengers went home. The film scores that speech as grief. So that is what everyone took from it. A broken man explaining his damage. But listen to what he says a moment later. He tells T'Challa plainly that he knew he could never kill the Avengers, because more powerful men had already tried. That is not a man overwhelmed by loss. That is a man who assessed a target, ruled out the direct approach, and selected a different one. And in Power Broker, the 3rd episode of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, he adds the part everyone forgets. He tells Sam that he is a baron and that his family was royalty until Sam's friends destroyed his country. Go back to the wreckage in Civil War, not for the confession. Watch it for what he is actually itemizing. A location, a distance, a timeline, a casualty count, and an outcome. Not a motive speech, not a breakdown, an incident report. Before Zemo detonated anything, the world had already written his argument into law. Watch the hearing in Captain America: Civil War. Secretary Ross stands in front of the team and reads the locations out like a charge sheet. New York, Washington, D.C., Sokovia, Lagos, 4 names, and his framing of the people responsible is a group who routinely ignore sovereign borders and inflict their will wherever they choose. That is the Sokovia Accords. And the scale of the response tells you how little disagreement there was. 117 countries ratified it. In the United States, the Senate voted for it 98-1, and the House 357-66. Understand what that document actually is. It isn't a punishment, it's an oversight framework. Enhanced individuals stop operating on their own judgment and start operating under a panel that answers to somebody. Every clause in it rests on one premise: that power without accountability eventually produces civilians in body bags. That premise did not come from nowhere. Christopher Marcus, one of the film's writers, has said the idea grew out of real criticism of these movies. Audiences asking why they were supposed to celebrate while half a city came down. So the diagnosis was accepted, near unanimously, written down, voted on, signed. And the man who had been living inside that diagnosis for years was processed as the Vienna bomber, given meals at 8 and 5, and never asked a single question about why he did it. The world agreed with him and filed him under terrorism in the same week. Nobody in that room ever reconciled the two, and nobody ever went back and tried. This is where the argument stops being comfortable, because it stops being about whether Zemo deserved sympathy. Here is the line he actually built his plan around. An empire toppled by its enemies can rise again, but one which crumbles from within is dead forever. That is not a threat, not vengeance, not a man who lost his family talking himself into something. That is a structural claim about how a specific kind of organization fails, and he made it about a group that had no chain of command, no oversight, no arbitration process, and nothing holding it together except 6 people choosing to trust each other. Structure like that has one point of failure, not the strongest member, the trust itself. Break the trust, and the structure doesn't get weaker. It stops existing, and no amount of power inside it can put it back. He didn't need to beat anyone. He needed one truth, delivered to the right man, in the right room. The writers knew exactly what they were building. Stephen McFeely has said their model was C7N, a villain who wins. As a viewer, that Empire line reads like a man gloating over rubble. As an adult, going back to it, it reads like a specification being read aloud before the work starts. And here is the uncomfortable part. The film agrees with him. It runs his method, shows it working exactly as described, and then hands him a cell. Because the alternative is admitting on screen that a man with no powers correctly identified what the Avengers were made of. In Captain America: Civil War, Steve Rogers stands in front of a television as a news anchor reads out Lagos, 26 dead. 11 of them Wakandan relief workers, there on an outreach mission when the fighting reached them. Here's the part almost nobody carries out of that scene. Those 11 are the only casualties here with a nationality, a job, and a reason for being there. Sokovia was worse and vaguer. 177 people died. The property damage is usually put at 474 billion. Some accountings say 487, and I'd flag that gap rather than pretend it's settled. But notice which figure everyone remembers. The money has a source and a decimal place. The 177 have neither. Zemo's wife and son are inside that number. So is his father. So are the 2 days it took him to find them. These figures aren't his ceiling, they're his floor. 4 locations were named in that hearing, and only 2 ever produced accountable dead. That's where his case sat. Correct, documented, attached to a man nobody would credit. So the story went looking for another way to prove it. In the 3rd episode of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Power Broker, there's a car ride. 3 men who should not be in a vehicle together, heading toward Madripoor, and one of them starts talking. Zemo tells Sam he must have really looked up to Steve. Then he says the thing. The danger with people like him, with America's super soldiers, is that we put them on pedestals. They become symbols, icons, and then we start to forget about their flaws. From there, cities fly, innocent people die, movements are formed, wars are fought. That's the full line, not half of it, the way it usually gets clipped. It doesn't stop at the pedestal. It ends with a sequence: worship, then forgetting, then bodies. The men in that car do not accept it. When Zemo pushes further in the next episode and puts the Avengers in a list with Nazis and Ultron, Sam cuts him off. Those are our friends he's talking about. Bucky tells him flatly that maybe he's wrong. 2 of the most decent characters in this franchise, rejecting the diagnosis in real time, on the record. They were wrong inside of 1 episode. In that same episode, the whole world is watching John Walker, the man the government selected, put in the suit and handed the shield, and who then took the super soldier serum himself, corners a surrendering flag smasher named Nico in a public square, in daylight, in front of a crowd with their phones out, and beats him to death with Captain America's shield. Not in a bunker, not off screen, not in the fog of a fight where you could argue about what he saw. A symbol, in the open, killing a man who had already stopped. The warning and the proof are separated by one episode of television, and this is the second time the story does this to him. Go back to Captain America: Civil War, to the containment cell in Berlin, and watch Everett Ross deliver the terms: meals at 8 and 5, toilet privileges twice a day, step out of line and he deals with you. Then Ross leans in and asks how it feels. All that time, all that effort, to see it fail so spectacularly. Zemo is being mocked for failing. He has already won. Steve and Tony are finished, the team is scattered, and the man in the glass box is the only person in that building who knows it. As a viewer, that scene plays like a villain getting what he deserves. As an adult, it plays like a man being congratulated on a victory nobody has noticed, by the one person in the room whose job was to notice. Two separate measurements, and Ross only ever ran one of them. He wasn't the villain who lost to the Avengers. He was the man who filed the report, and the report was accepted, and nobody signed his name to it. Look at what happened immediately after he finished. Sam Wilson, Wanda Maximoff, Clint Barton, and Scott Lang end up in the Raft, a maximum security prison at the bottom of the ocean. Wanda is in a restraint jacket and a shock collar. No trial is named on screen. No hearing. 4 people who had, days earlier, been the world's protection, held underwater because the structure that was supposed to govern them had already broken in half. Then the world got bigger and the pattern held. Half of everyone came back at once, and the response was the Global Repatriation Council, a body created to manage the displacement, staffed by people making decisions about millions of lives. Out of that came the Flag Smashers, a group that took the super soldier serum to fight it. Enhanced power on one side, an institution with no accountability on the other, and civilians standing in the space between them. That is his sentence about cities flying and innocent people dying, playing out with new names. And then Westview. Wanda held an entire town under psychological control, walked out at the end of it, and faced no legal consequence for any of it. The people who made that show were clear about what it was. Director Matt Shakman said they weren't trying to let her off the hook, and head writer Jack Schaefer said there would probably be reckonings down the line. 4 times then. The Raft, the Council, the serum in Walker's blood, the town. 4 separate occasions where enhanced power produced harm and no system existed to answer for it. And every one of them arrives after the man who described the mechanism was already in a cell. In truth, the 5th episode of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Zemo goes to the Sokovian Memorial to stand in front of his dead. Bucky finds him there and points a gun at him that has already been emptied. Then the Dora Milaje take him, and Io says where he is going and how long he is staying. The Raft. He will live out his days there. That is the last thing the story does with him as a person, but it is not the last thing he does. Here is what happens after those doors close, and it's the part almost nobody registers on a first watch. From inside the Raft, through his butler Oeznik, Zemo has the van transporting the captured Flag Smashers destroyed. The remaining super soldiers gone. That was the goal he stated out loud when he walked out of prison, and he completes it from a cell at the bottom of the sea. The show cuts to him hearing the news. He smiles. 2 properties. 2 wins. The second one closed while he was already serving a life sentence for the first. As a viewer, you watched a man get caught twice and you scored it as 2 defeats. As an adult, going back through it, both endings are the same shape. A man finishing a job and then being taken somewhere the story doesn't have to look at him again. Not a hero, not a martyr, not a misunderstood man who deserved better. Accurate. That's all. And accurate is not a defense, because Vienna still happened and T'Chaka is still dead, and none of that is undone by him having read the room correctly. That's the cost, and it runs both directions. He lost his family, then he spent everything he had left proving a point to people who had already stopped listening, and he ends underwater with nothing but the satisfaction of being right. And the Accords themselves, the one institutional response the world managed to build around his diagnosis, are, by 2025, reported as repealed. The argument was won, written into law by 117 countries, and then quietly thrown away. So here is what happens next, and it isn't a guess. The next time an enhanced individual in this franchise causes mass civilian harm, the sequence will run exactly as it has run every time before. There will be a damage figure with a source and a decimal place. The dead will be a number without names. Someone in a hearing room will say the locations out loud like a charge sheet, and the man who described this whole machine before it started will still be at the bottom of the ocean, still serving his sentence, still uncredited. Drop in the comments which antagonist you think made the most accurate read on the heroes they were fighting, because I've got a list, and some of the names on it are going to be uncomfortable.